says we don't see great strategy racing anymore? Today's 400 mostly green flag laps at Richmond resulted in a late race charge by two of the vets. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric. Welcome to Out of the Groove Richmond Raceway Review Edition. This was an important race for everyone, of course. We're 7 races into the season. This is the first short track race since the exhibition race, the Clash. But Joe Gibbs Racing, above everybody else, had this date circled, and for good reason. The team has had tremendous success at Richmond in recent years, but was yet to win a race in 2022. We're going to talk about Joe Gibbs Racing's performance today. We'll talk about a lot of the other top finishers and top storylines. We'll put this race on the Groovy Gauge at the end. But let's begin with the great strategy racing we saw at the end of today's race. It looked like this one was going to come down to William Byron of Hendrick Motorsports and Martin Truex Jr. from JGR. The final restart came with, about 160 laps to go, which meant every driver, every team had a decision to make. Do we make 2 pit stops during that final stint, divided into thirds sort of, or 1 pit stop right in the middle somewhere? William Byron and many of the leaders appeared to go with that 2-stop strategy. Byron, who was the leader at the time, pit with about 90 laps to go. Meanwhile, Martin Truex Jr., the second place car, pit with 77 to go. Looked like a 1-stop strategy for Truex, pitting smack dab in the middle of that final long green flag stint. But as the run continued and many of the other leaders made their second pit stops, it became clear that William Byron was doing a modified 1-stop strategy. Drivers like Hamlin, Harvick made a second pit stop and they were charging there in the closing laps. Again, this race looked like it was going to come down to Byron versus Truex. Could Truex reel Byron in with 13 lap pressure tires? But ultimately, Hamlin and Harvick charged through the field, especially with about 20 laps to go. I tweeted with like 20 to go that unless a caution comes out, Byron's probably going to win this, because at that point, the lap times for Byron had been pretty stable. Truex had evened out. He wasn't catching him anymore. And I thought with those lap times, there was no way Harvick or Hamlin could catch him. But then with about 20 to go, Byron's tires really fell off. His lap times cratered. Truex closed in, and Hamlin and Harvick especially closed in. And with less than 5 laps to go, Denny Hamlin made the pass for the lead look easy. Harvick got by as well. It came down to the 2 of them in the final corners, and Denny Hamlin held off Harvick for his first win of 2022. Harvick, man, I was actually pulling for him at the end there. Guy hasn't won a cup race in nearly a year and a half. The wait continues. Denny Hamlin wins for the first time this year and gets Joe Gibbs Racing their first victory of 2022. Like I said, coming into this race, Joe Gibbs Racing was the team under the microscope. Winless so far this year. Hendrick's got 3 wins. SHR has a win. Penske has a win. Trackhouse has a win. All eyes were on Toyota, who by their very high standards had not run super well to begin this year. I'm not going to act like Joe Gibbs Racing and Toyota have been bad, but they haven't been as good as we're used to seeing them. Today at one of their best racetracks, they shined. Once again, all 4 Joe Gibbs Racing cars finished in the top 9. Kyle Busch would have finished better than that if not for a late race penalty that was kind of a questionable or at least somewhat controversial call by NASCAR. The call was right. Kyle Busch's team put tape on the grill, which is explicitly defined in the rulebook as illegal, but it sounds like, and I've seen some seemingly photographic evidence, that piece of tape was there for like 200 laps, and NASCAR waited until the final stint of the race to notice and black flag the team. So right call, but certainly still poor officiating by NASCAR. They should have caught it much sooner. But again, despite that penalty to Kyle Busch, all 4 Gibbs cars finished in the top 9. Guys like Christopher Bell were challengers for the win. Denny Hamlin, Martin Truex were both there at the very end. Even Kyle Busch, who at one point while running 5th today, radioed to his crew that the car was killed. Even he looked like a threat to win at points today. So Joe Gibbs Racing looked great. 2311 Racing was kind of a mess today. If you need any further proof that 2311 Racing and Joe Gibbs Racing are not the exact same team, today was your proof. Bubba Wallace ran outside of the top 20 most of the day. Kurt Busch had issues on lap like 3. The fuel pickup broke or something. They had to replace the fuel pump, some other pieces. He spent this entire race many laps down. So 2311 Racing was still a mess, but Joe Gibbs Racing looked like their typical Richmond selves. No one JGR driver dominated this race like Ryan Blaney, a Penske driver, led the first 100 and something laps of this race. Byron led a bunch there towards the end. Truex did win stage 2, but as a team, all 4 of their cars seem to have top 5 speed. To me, that's a successful day. It doesn't tell me that Joe Gibbs Racing is 100% back, that, we're going to roll into Martinsville next week and they're going to dominate, or a few weeks from now when we're at an intermediate track again. I don't necessarily expect Joe Gibbs Racing to go out and dominate, but it shows that they're not far behind, if behind at all. Some teams that we have spoke highly of at the beginning of this year were no-shows today. Trackhouse had moments where Ross Chastain was up front battling for the lead. He and Ryan Blaney traded blows that Fox caught. I don't know if Fox caught every angle, but what we saw on Fox was Blaney kind of missed the corner and rubbed Chastain up out of the way. Chastain bumped Blaney out of the way in the very next corner, and then a restart or two later, Blaney redelivered that shot to Chastain and knocked him back. All fair in my opinion. I mean, maybe 2-1 in favor of Blaney. Maybe Chastain could have gotten him back if he'd ever got to him again. But hey, Chastain has to expect some of this. If he's going to dish it out, he's got to take it. Everyone knows that Ross Chastain won't pass up an opportunity to hit somebody, so they're going to pay that favor to him any chance they get. But stage 3, I don't know if the handle just went away. Chastain faded out of the top 10. Suarez was up there once on strategy, but he really wasn't a true top 10 car. RCR was a no-show today, at least by their recent standards. Most of this race, Austin Dillon and Tyler Reddick were in the mid-teens, the high teens. If we look at the top finishers, I know they both snuck into the top 12 there at the end, but that's not really where they ran most of today. So a little surprising. I've actually come to expect a lot more from RCR based on their early season performance. Chase Elliott's another guy who just must have lost the handle on that car late. Maybe they made some bad adjustments because he was up in the top 5, top 10 all day, finishes 14th. I want to shout out the 2 RFK cars. Both Keselowski and Chris Buescher spent a decent amount of the day inside the top 10 at the same time. That's a team that desperately needs some good runs going forward, and they got it for the most part today. Collected a few stage points here and there and come home with top 15s. Nothing to get out of your seat and thrilled about, but a step in the right direction. Joey Logano actually finished 17th. He had a pretty good car today, probably a top 5 car. I think he was running second when they had an issue on pit road. I believe the jack broke and they had to swap out jacks mid-stop. Cost him a lot of track position. Track position he never completely got back. Not much else to point out among the top finishers here, but I don't want to skip over Denny Hamlin individually. I know I talked about Joe Gibbs Racing and how they overall impressed today, but Denny Hamlin needed this win. This is his home track, I think. Is this or Martinsville his home track? He's a Virginia driver. This track's in Virginia. He's had success here in the past, but he was on a tremendous losing streak. Like, you know, he won a couple races late last season, but he hadn't finished in the top 10 yet in 2022. I think he'd have been pleased with the top 5 today, but winning? I mean, you saw the joy, the emotion when he got out of that car, standing up on the roof, fist pumping. I even heard mostly cheers in the crowd. At least that's how it sounded on TV. This win meant a lot to Denny Hamlin, a guy who's been around, won a lot of races, even in recent years. It's not like he's riding a 50 race winless streak or anything. The man was in the championship 4 just a few months ago. He won a race today at one of his best tracks and was emotional. That tells you how big of a struggle this year has been and how much pressure he was under to start performing. No one really was worried about him missing the playoffs, even though he hadn't finished in the top 10 yet this season, because we all figured he'd win a race at some point, or at least click off a few top 10s and top 5s and make his way back into the top 16. But it's human nature to have some doubts that linger. It reminded me of my favorite driver, Matt Kenseth. Hamlin's, 41 years old? Around this point in Matt Kenseth's career, by the time he was in his early to mid 40s, when he would win a race in 2015, 2016, he'd say often that, these things are hard to win and you're never sure when you're going to win your next one, if you're going to win another one. And now that Hamlin's in his 40s, and I mean, he only won twice last year, took him until the playoffs to finally find victory lane. JGR has been a little off this year. He's been off this year. You just never know. I think those doubts get louder and louder the older you get and the less frequently you find success. So I'm actually really happy for Denny Hamlin. We've talked about him a lot on the show recently because he's one of the most outspoken drivers. He'll share his thoughts on every aspect of the industry. Sometimes we'll agree with him, sometimes we won't, but he's a great race car driver. You know this win meant a lot to him, meant a lot to that team, so I'm happy to see him get it. It's cool to have another different winner, 7 races, 7 different winners, another new team winning, new winning team for this season at least. I'm happy for Denny Hamlin. All feels kind of right in the world to see a JGR Toyota win at Richmond. That's my takeaway from today's race. This was one of those races where, on paper, not a lot happened. There were 2 or 3 cautions, for instance, some spins mid-pack. But you can really learn a lot from this race. You could see clearly who the fast cars, who the best teams were. It's clear that Joe Gibbs Racing still has something to show at short tracks. It's clear that Hendrick Motorsports, they had all their drivers up near the top 5, top 10 at some point today. Blaney, who's led the most laps this season, led the most laps today. So today was the kind of race where you start to pick out trends. If you run well at Richmond, there's a good chance you'll run well at Phoenix. So it was interesting to see those kind of trends develop throughout the day. But let's talk about the racing, the bigger picture. It wasn't the rough, aggressive short track race that I think many of us expected, considering how Circuit of the Americas played out, considering how yesterday's Xfinity race ended with teammates bumping into each other. No, instead it was full of long green flag runs, a lot of pitch strategy. That's how stage 2 was settled. That's obviously how the finish was settled. A different pace, a different tone to this race than any other race race we've seen so far in 2022. And some fans aren't gonna like it. Some fans want the close quarters action, the beating and banging, the heated tempers consistently. But sometimes that kind of racing is not on the menu. You gotta be happy with a technical, elaborate strategy race. I think it was a great coincidence that Chad Knaus was in the booth this week, because as a 7-time championship crew chief, I think he had a lot of interesting insight to add, especially when teams were thinking about when to make their first or second or last pit stops. I'm glad we had a crew chief in the booth instead of a couple of drivers for this kind of race, because I enjoyed it. It's like a joke that takes a long time to get to the punchline. This race had a great punchline. I mean, the final pass for the lead came with like 4 laps to go. It just took a long time to get there. Not everyone is willing to sit through the long drawn out story to then get to the punchline, but if you sat through it, which I think many of you did, I hope you were excited, or hope you felt like it was worth it, because I thought it was. Yeah, Denny Hamlin winning, not like a new first-time winner, not another, in fact, the drivers under 30 years old streak is over. An old guy won a race, but it was still thrilling in its own way. It reminded me of a Formula One finish. It reminded me of many IndyCar road course finishes when there's a heavy strategy component, and really who has the freshest tires and when and how they get through traffic, that's who wins. That's how today's race played out. It's just weird to see that kind of racing play out at a short track, and I know Richmond's kind of like the intermediate track of short tracks, but it's still a short track. It's not going to be everyone's favorite flavor, but I thought it was a nice change of pace. 7 races in, and we've seen 7 very different styles of races, 7 very different finishes, and today continued that trend. So I enjoyed this finish, but I understand that maybe some people wanted to see more physical racing down the stretch. We're not going to get Circuit of the Americas every single week. I appreciated this change of pace. Anyways, let's put this thing on the groovy gauge. I'm going to give today's Richmond race a 68% on the groovy gauge. This year I'm going with some more specific scores. Usually I pick like a round number like 75, 80, 90. I'm gonna start putting more specific numbers in there. This wasn't the nicest race in the world, so I'm gonna leave it at a 68%. It was a very solid race. I would say it was an above average race. The finish was interesting, it was different. I was engaged and intrigued all throughout the end of stage 3, especially as we slowly revealed what William Byron's and Rudy Fugel's strategy actually was. We all thought they were on a 2-stop strategy. Turns out they were on a 1-stop strategy, and it almost paid off for them. I felt like the punchline delivered in this case. So I'm gonna give this race a 68%. Not a barn burner, but not a disappointment by any means. It was a very solid Richmond race. I mean, does anyone expect the world from Richmond Raceway at this point? I mean, I don't. Let me know what score you would give today's Richmond race down in the comment section below. I do want to reiterate one more time, I really enjoyed Chad Knaus as an addition to the booth. I don't know how many or any other races he's going to do this year, but I hope he comes back. I thought the bit during the broadcast when Clint Boyer was joking about Chad Knaus's like notebook full of notes and then Boyer's like whiteboard of notes, to me that was Clint Boyer accidentally dunking on himself. I don't think Boyer adds a lot of interesting insight to these broadcasts. He's there to play a character. He's there to sort of fill the gap Darrell Waltrip filled for many years. The difference was Darrell Waltrip won 84 races and championships. Clint Boyer didn't do that. So to me, sometimes the antics ring a bit hollow. Obviously, I've come on this show many times this year and preach to Fox to drop some of the slapstick comedy in favor of more serious, dramatic, objective play-by-play, and we have not gotten that this year. The pre-race show today was another level of cringe. I'm not saying we can't have fun or have funny moments, but they should be moments. They should not be drawn-out, scripted segments, and I think Fox and their producers fall into that trap with the pre-race show, and I think occasionally Clint Boyer leans a little too far into that during the race itself. So I thought Chad Knaus in there balanced him off very, very nicely. I hope he comes back. I didn't catch if he is or what races he might have on the schedule later this year, but I hope Chad Knaus is back. Let me know down in the comments if I missed something. But yeah, those are my final thoughts on today's race. Appreciate you guys watching. Share your thoughts again down in the comment section below. If you're new to the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button. We talk NASCAR news, race recaps, and much, much more every single day here on Out of the Groove. You're not going to want to miss a thing. And as always, a big thank you to my amazing Patreon supporters for going above and beyond to support the channel. I truly appreciate it. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll be back later this week. We'll have lots to talk about before Martinsville, which is a Saturday night Cup Series race this next week, and I will be there. It's gonna be my first trip out to Martinsville. I'm super duper excited. Have a fantastic rest of your weekend, y'all. I'll see you again very, very soon.